luckily, a bunch of people working together, coming from a wide variety of different fields, are able to work with each other and come up with ideas that anybody individually couldn't come up with, including people can come up, if you get a diverse group of people from a wide variety of backgrounds and experiences, people in an interdisciplinary group can often come up with solutions which people who are just one group alone might not think of. And so that's what we're focusing on at Singularity University. At Singularity University, we are focused on how can you bring groups of people together to focus on global grand challenges. I mean, you know, here's the ones that we focus on, although this is not an exclusive list. Just what are the things where you have tens of millions, hundreds of millions, or even billions of people facing challenges today, which we might be able to work on today in a way which we couldn't do 20 years ago or 10 years ago. And while technology is not the end-all and be-all of how you solve problems, technology is something that gives individuals the power to get together with each other. It gives individuals the power to augment themselves, to be able to connect, to be able to bring ideas together, to talk to anybody else out of the 7 billion people in the world. And think about it from the perspective of 10 years ago. The fact that nowadays I can pick up my phone and there's 4 billion people that I might be able to make a phone call to, that's pretty interesting. 10 years ago, there was barely 1 billion people who had cell phones. And I'll be talking a little bit more about those cell phones later on. Now, along with these global grand challenges, the 1.5 billion people who don't have access to electricity, the 750 million people who don't have access to clean water on a regular basis, there's also challenges which are going to be facing us in the future. One of those of which, and it's directly related to the technologies we've been talking about, is the potential for automation. Just in the past few years, I think this has become a topic that people have been recognizing. It's starting to get into the press. People are thinking about what it means. And a lot of that is because some of these technologies are just sort of like that robot, which is a little bit creepy, but well, it's almost but not there. We're also dealing with technologies which are sort of getting to the almost but not there. I mean, somebody built a algorithm which can recognize cats on the internet. Well, okay, that's great, cats. But what happens in 2 years later when the identical algorithm can recognize cancer cells? Or can recognize, other information in a radiologist set of information, which maybe even the radiologists themselves can't pick up. That starts going from creepy to, what do you think about that? So that's what I want to be focusing on. Because, with these jobs, this has already been a topic we're thinking about. I mean, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, people might have said, oh, in the future, in the 2014, 15% of the way done with the 21st century, we're all going to be working 20-hour work weeks. And that's not what's really happening. And in fact, we're having people starting to say, well, you have some people who are working 20-hour work weeks, but those are the people who don't want those 20-hour work weeks. Just this is one picture of how things are changing. You have, everybody working 60-hour weeks, but it might be, the people in the top level positions who are working 60-hour weeks by choice, and other people might be working 3 25-hour jobs because that's all that they're able to get. And what are the causes of this? There's multiple complex economic and social factors going into it, but we have reason to believe, and there's starting to be evidence that technological unemployment, the change from used to have somebody at the grocery store, and suddenly there's a little bit less people and less people there. It's not anything that in any one year everybody disappears, but how many people use software to do their taxes? TurboTax, anything like that. And 20 years ago, that was not something that anybody did. So there's this slow change in technology. It's important to be able to look at it and understand it. And as I say, at Singularity University and in my own experience for the past 10 years, that's what I've been focusing on. We have to look into the future. This is from a paper by Osborne and Frey. Some researchers are just saying, okay, take all of the jobs that exist in the United States and start figuring out what does it take to do that job. Is it physical labor? Is it creativity? 25 different characteristics. They started saying, well, given where computers are going, given what automation could do, and also given what robots are able to do, as robots move from something, we're all used to the idea of robots, machines being able to do things which just require sheer power. I mean, if you want to dig a hole in the ground, you're not going to use a pickaxe. You're going to send a big drill after it. If you want to plow the ground, you're not going to pull it or use a horse. You're going to have your tractor do it. But that is sheer power. It's not finesse. But what happens if they're able to have finesse? So they did some calculations, and you may agree or disagree about any particular job, whether or not it can be automated. But they're saying that a lot of jobs in the next 20 years, it's 50% of jobs in the United States could be automated. And this is really incredible news. And you know, I'm not going to say that, you know, this is one paper. This is, you know, a bunch of people getting together and just sort of setting a bit of opinion on it. They could be wrong about any particular job, but do I think that they could be wrong about all jobs, that no jobs will be automated? I think that's very unlikely. So the question is, how can we react to this? What can we do about it? Because, you know, 20 years doesn't seem like too long from now. On the other hand, you know, 20 years from now is quite a lot of time in other perspectives. I mean, a person can create a large business and do interesting things in 10 years or 15 years. So depending on how you look at it and depending how surprised you are by this, 20 years might seem to come out of nowhere, or we can be working on it today and thinking about how do we get ourselves prepared for a future where this might be happening? What are the new jobs that we can have, or what are the new ways that we approach this? So what is the cause of this potential change that's going on? Oh, sorry, I just wanted to mention, a lot of the jobs that they said were most likely to disappear were service jobs. You know, the other colors in this are agriculture and also just sort of industrial jobs. And as you can see, looking at the whole world, the majority of jobs in the world are service jobs. So it's not just something that we're facing in the United States, but this change also could be happening everywhere else. And of course, even agriculture itself is going to be changing. We're seeing starting glimpses of that, and I'll be talking about that a little bit later on. So what's behind this? Singularity University, we focus on exponential technologies, rapidly changing technologies. And so when you think about an exponential set of things, well, compare it to linear, right? If you're walking linearly, you take a step, each step you go identical distance across the room. So if I took 30 steps, I'm over there. Exponential steps would be each time I'm doubling, right? So you know, I'm taking one step, and the next one I'm taking 2 steps, and the next one I'm taking 4 steps. And if I were to take 30 exponential steps, I'd be going around the Earth 26 times. It's a different way of doing numbers. Now, one thing a lot of people have thought they've been seeing exponentials recently, if anybody's played this game. So this is an exponential technology that you're playing it on, but 2048 is not exponential. Each additional little bit takes just as much time as the time before it. It takes as long to get from 0 to 1,000 as it takes to get from 1,000 to 2,000. That is not exponential. But many things are exponential in the world. So this is a commonly used chart, just sort of a big overview of technologies. And what it's saying that the computing that you can get for $1,000, adjusted for inflation, over the past 110 years is 1,000 million times larger than what it was then. And that's quite a lot more than we're used to thinking about. There's just very little in our lives where we're suddenly dealing with something 1,000,000 times more, 1,000,000,000 times more, 1,000,000,000,000 times more, except for in the area of technologies. And it isn't just sort of overall computing, you know, the Moore's law stuff. There's also, you know, sort of all the associated parts of technologies, the number of transistors that exist, the speed of the networks, things where the change from decade to decade is not, oh, it's 10 times better, it's 100 times better, it's 100,000 times better, it's 100 million times better. And so these technologies all by themselves, well, I mean, that's good for the people working with them, but they sort of, they creep up on us. We don't necessarily see how quickly they're changing. And until you understand how quickly they're changing, you might not grasp how much this will be able to empower people to work with these technologies, because, you know, the flip side of these things being 100 million times faster is that they're in some sense 100 million times cheaper. Although we don't really see it that way. I mean, everybody here probably has a cell phone, which if you wanted to get that level of computing 2 decades ago would have cost you $300 million. But very few people here, I'm sure, feel like, you know, that they have $300 million worth of goods. And as I say, that's another way that exponential technologies kind of fool us, because the changes over time, we get used to them. You know, in a way that, you know, if our cars were to go from, okay, my Mercury Lynx topped out at 85 miles an hour downhill, and then, you know, my next car gets a little faster, and my next car gets a little bit faster. If my cars went from 85 to 85,000 over the course of a decade, that would be pretty amazing. That is what our computers are doing. So I want to go into computing specifically. How many people have met a computer? A few people have, actually. So computing is a job. You know, baking is somebody who bakes, right? You know, a farmer is somebody who farms. A computer used to be somebody who computed. And back 110 years ago, if you had $1,000 of equivalent money, you could hire somebody, and imagine that you've hired a computer, and they're sitting there and calculating things for you for a year. And this is how it started out, with people just doing the calculations, the mechanical calculators that we had. Well, how did this change over time? Well, we started in the 1940s having the first digital computers, and the first digital computers were slower in some cases than the human computers. But suddenly it starts getting a little bit faster, it gets a little bit faster, and then one digital computer can do what a human could do in a year, but instead in a month. And then it becomes to one digital computer can do what a human could do in a day, in an hour, in a second. So that at some point you get one digital computer which in the course of 1 second could do as much calculation as the entire human race could over a year. And so this is how our capabilities are changing. And of course, so this, this new computer, we wouldn't call it just the equivalent of a computer, we'd call it a supercomputer. And so going in, this is a chart of the fastest supercomputers in the world. Starting in 1990 and going through now. And I don't want to go into the specific details of it. It's kind of interesting where these are and what they're doing. There's different uses. Some of them were used for doing weapons testings. Others were used for sort of simulating, the Earth's environment, the countries where these are at. I mean, it's generally sort of been the U.S. and Japan, but recently China's been the one building them. And of course, the fastest supercomputer in the world is something that people work very deliberately to do. In some cases, the 10th fastest or the 20th fastest nowadays are computers which individuals are able to build. And that also is a pretty amazing thing. But anyways, each of these things represents probably $100 million to $1 billion worth of work. And so I just want to go a little bit into this because, to take away all the complexity, we start seeing changes over time. It's been a pretty straight graph, even when you look at the times when we had economic speed-ups and economic slowdowns, supercomputers. It's been a very steady pace, and there's good evidence it's going to be keeping on. So here's what's interesting. Right now it's 2014, and if you look at the sort of the early 90s, that's your cell phone. I mean, you can't make a direct comparison between the fastest computer in the world in 1990 and your cell phone, but they're kind of equivalent. I mean, when you look at your cell phone and you're able to watch a movie on it or play a game on it, and it's able to render a movie equivalent in real time. I mean, you think about it, when George Lucas was trying to make movies in the 70s and 80s, he would have computers running for a week to be able to simulate even 5 minutes worth of special effects. And we're just used to having it real time on our computer, sometimes simulating cats. The next most interesting thing also, so that the circle of the fastest supercomputers in the world in 2000, and 2000 is not that long ago, that is your laptops, that's your desktop computer. That's it, if you want to get real fast processors because you're doing something computationally intensive, you could go buy a teraflop GPU for about $1,000. No, actually I'm wrong, it's probably about 2 or 3 teraflops at this point for $1,000. So you're able to buy the equivalent of the fastest supercomputer in the world in 1990 or in 2000 now. So what does that mean for the year 2024? Well, you're starting to look at a point where in 2024, whatever it is that we have at home, our computers or access to cloud, we then will have access to computing which is as fast as the fastest supercomputer in the world was not too long ago. So what does this give us, and what does this mean as far as our capabilities? Well, 17 years ago, it took a lot of researchers a bunch of time to be able to build one simulation of the world, just to be able to check out weather patterns, versus more recently, the same level of compute, or the same level group of people for roughly the same amount of money are able to build a simulation which is much more detailed. This is a picture of Hurricane Sandy, and so when you go from I mean, this used to be amazing. You would have seen this if it was 17 years ago and you said, we can simulate it looking like that. Now you look at it and saying, that looks like a cartoon. That looks like something that my kid would be working on if they're building a simulation or model of the Earth in their 6th grade class, which is true. This is the sort of thing kids would be able to work on today. So this change from being able to go from this is what we have to this is what we're able to do just in 17 years is pretty amazing. So now you're able to do this sort of the 17-year-old go simulation at home. Now, of course, when you're looking at this, you're saying, okay, well, yeah, okay, the person is able to do the simulation because of the computing at home, but they still needed satellite data and everything else that came from governments and the weather agencies. Well, even that is starting to change. So this is some friends of mine who started a company called Planet Labs, and they're building satellites. And these satellites are able to, they send a swarm of them up there. They cost about $300,000 each. And they're expecting that within a year or two, they're going to get under $100,000, which might sound like a lot, but right, previously this would be $300 million. So from $300 million to $300,000. This is the sort of stuff which technology enables. Satellites, the sort of thing which used to be in the domain of governments, are now in the hands of ordinary people being able to do the work. You know, better yet, I think, you know, this year we're looking, it's been the 45th anniversary of this amazing event, the first time that we went to the moon. You know, I'm a real big space fan ever since I, you know, read Heinlein as a little kid and thinking about this stuff, and it's like, yeah, going to the moon, isn't that amazing? And of course, we haven't really been back, and for a lot of people that's sad, and you know, it's like, yeah, going to the moon, think about it, going to the moon. To go to the moon in the past, you had to be Russia, you had to be China, you had to be the United States. You had to be sort of the largest and most powerful countries in the world. Now, if you want to go to the moon, though, it's starting to change. You can be, you know, Russia, China, the United States, or my friend Bob. Bob Richards is one of the founders of Moon Express. It's one of the companies which is competing in the Google Lunar X Prize to be able to send a robot to the moon, and the robot moves around, takes some pictures, does some things. That's pretty amazing. The idea that something that used to be only in the hands of government can be in the hands of ordinary individuals just over the course of 45 years. And they say it's, you know, you see it in the computing, you see it in your cell phones, but because these technologies enable so much more, it becomes it changes to many more topics where this level of computing, going from governments to individuals, going from $300 million to $300. You know, think about those drones that we've been seeing. Think about some of these robots that people are able to build in the labs. It wasn't that this sort of technology didn't sort of exist 20 years ago, but if you wanted to have drone-like capability, you were probably going to be spending $1 million, $10 million, $100 million, and now you can find it at the local toy store with an HD camera. So it's like this perspective on these technologies and how much they change. I mean, it's like that when you take a step back and just sort of look how much things have changed, what do we have? I mean, it is both really powerful, and it's one of the reasons why at Singularity University we think that small teams can work on problems that weren't solvable 20 years ago, because we have tools that didn't exist 20 years ago, or we have tools that did exist 20 years ago, but only one person had them 20 years ago. Now 100 million people have them today. And that is a really powerful capability that we have. But I want to go back into the topic of AI and robotics, because I think robots are AIs which are able to move around in a lot of ways if they're autonomous. Because, you know, we can talk about, you know, what is it that we're thinking about could be happening in the next few years, and how quickly can these things change when you start looking at AI and algorithmic capabilities compared to, say, where supercomputers are going or where satellites are going. That's sort of interesting. I mean, a few years ago we had IBM Watson, and they spent hundreds of millions of dollars to be able to win Jeopardy, which is, you know, pretty nice, but at the time people were thinking, okay, that's interesting, that's one thing, but where is that going to go? But remember, you know, when I was showing that graph, that the fastest supercomputer in the world, and when they built Watson, Watson certainly would have been up there in the top 1,000 fastest supercomputers in the world. Those supercomputing capabilities, they start going from something which only one company has to something which more people are buying. 5 companies have them, 20 companies have them. Then that level of computing gets down to where individuals are buying it, and you go from 1 in the world to 100 million in the world. Well, think about what happens. You know, they've been starting to use Watson for multiple purposes. Watson went to med school. Watson has been, for example, learning how to deal with financial data. This is a fairly recent news where they gave Watson all the data about what it's like to transition from military life to civilian life, and what are the things a person needs to think about. And so Watson is sitting there with USAA helping people as they come through the process. When you first heard about Watson doing Jeopardy, you might not have thought, well, is Watson going to be able to do insurance? Is Watson going to be able to do, or Watson-like capabilities going to be able to do financial services? What happens when Watson and, you know, Watson Financial Services is sitting right there next to TurboTax? It's going to come up. It's going to be something which is possible. Not right now, not 2 years from now, but say 10 years from now. And at that point, is it good to advise your children to think about becoming tax accountants? Possibly not. And you know, similarly, you know, it's like there's other ways that technologies can change us. I mean, if you were thinking about advising your child to become a dentist, when dental cavities may soon be having a vaccine against them, and there'll be less cavities and less overall jobs, and still some work, but just not as many as before, it's good to know about these technologies and where they're coming. And again, Watson and this one particular project is not going to be putting accountants out of work immediately. It's never that all jobs disappear immediately. You know, the autonomous cars that Brad is talking about, it's not that they are going to be disappearing all at once, but slowly over time, and it sort of feels like it's coming out of nowhere, individuals are able to buy Watson-like capabilities. Individuals are able to have a car which is able to take them around and do things. Trucking companies are able to have autonomous trucks, and so just slowly by slowly you need less people, you know, doing one particular job. And if you're thinking about it and you're ready for it, and you've been talking about it, and you have everybody in the room together thinking about where this is going to go, and talking about what the community college should be teaching, and talking about how do you educate kids to be able to work with these new technologies, 3D printers, robotics, and the rest, which is exactly what everybody's doing here today, then you have a community which is not going to be surprised by this. And if you're not doing this, then you're going to have people where this, as I say, this is going to feel like it's coming out of nowhere, but it never does. It usually takes things about 20 years to become an overnight success. And so the technologies that are around today, the capabilities which are around today, just doing one thing or two things, suddenly gets to be the point where they're able to do 100 things or 1,000 things. And this is something that I'm really interested in. People working in exponential technologies have really focused on just making this more visible, because of course, when you talk about job losses, that can be a frightening thing, but these technologies to me are also really enabling technologies. And so what I'm really excited about, what they're able to do. Here's another one, and I just wanted to go back to that, you know, when you think about robots or technology, used to be able to do just the hard work. I mean, that started 200 years ago. People no longer needed to pull things. You had engines which could move things. But they couldn't do fine work. They couldn't figure things out. Well, this is just sort of one of those like very first steps on a long set of things which are going to change. So this is a lettuce spot, which is put out by Blue Rivers Technology, still in early development. It can deal with multiple aspects of planting and harvesting lettuce. Now, anybody, when you've been doing your garden, if you're trying to transplant lettuce or move your sets from place to place, you know that a lot of times lettuce can be easily damaged when you're moving it. And so to be able to plant lettuce or plant things, seedlings of this type, you have to have a robot which is able to see exactly where it is and pick that right point, not get into those. You're going to start squishing the roots. You have to be just right above it, that one spot. Once you have robots which are capable of handling little tiny sproutlings of lettuce and moving them around, well, what are the other things which that level of finesse would allow you to do? Because once you have that technology for one field and area, it very quickly, that hand which is capable of noticing and seeing and moving and picking can start working on other things, including fine arts, including testing materials, which today we have humans testing. So once you see one of them, you have to start thinking about, well, where does that go next? And again, not overnight, but over the course of 20 years, things are going to be changing. So taking a big step back from all of that, I wanted to just, things that I'm personally excited about because of these technologies and what's going to be happening over the next few years. Well, one of the things I'm quite excited by is that while we've gone from, 1 million, 100 million, 1 billion people having access to the internet, that we're looking over the next few years that we could be in a world where everybody on Earth has access to the internet. And not just access to the internet, but access to the services which we can get on the internet, which includes weather data, which includes market forecasts, which includes medical information, and slightly into the future, you have a set of symptoms and you can text your symptoms to a Watson-like entity and it can give you good information back. And or in other cases, you can, as the case that was talked about earlier, if you have a particularly complex medical situation, how can you find the best person in the world and get them to connect with you? What if the best person in the world working on a medical condition is in another country and speaks another language? Well, right now, that's going to be pretty much an insurmountable barrier unless you can get a translator. But one of the things which is coming up, we already have it sort of for a couple of languages, and again, things can change really quickly, is real-time translation. So imagine being able to, you meet somebody and you don't speak the same languages, but if you phone each other, the phone is able to do translation for you. So this world where everybody has the ability to talk with each other, to find each other, to share information, that is a world where when people start coming up with solutions to the problems that we find, those solutions can be spread faster than ever before. Another thing which I think that this makes possible is in the case of, is for education, and a world where every classroom in the world can be connected to other ones, where you can have sister schools, where you can have sort of like a little screen in the wall, or perhaps it's somebody's cell phone, where kids in one class who are studying a particular mathematical topic can talk to kids in 5 different classrooms around the world and learn from each other and use the best available methods to talk to each other. Because again, it's this ability to see out in the world and be able to talk to people who have the same experiences as you, even in different places, is something which is going to be really helpful. If one community is dealing with a particular set of job losses, to be able to quickly find other communities around the world who are facing the same things, to be able to have people who, imagine that if you're, an adult and you're illiterate and you need to learn how to read, if you could be connected to other people who went through just recently the same thing, and they can help you, and they can stay connected to you, so you're not just limited to whoever is right next to you, because especially people in rural areas, if you've got a specialized condition, something that's gone wrong, why not meet the best people around the world who can work with you in fixing on that, rather than just 1 or 2 people? So we're getting this window on the world that kids are going to be able to have. And of course, it's not all about the technology. The technology is only the enabler. What people talk about is up to them. But we are in this place where people around the world will have these connective technologies, and so really every child is going to have a window out to the rest of the world, and all of us are going to be able to take a very high view and look out over this world and be able to sort of think about what are the types of problems we want to work on, meet people who also want to work on those problems, and get together to work on it. In other words, well, we have supercomputers in our pocket, but we ourselves are coming to, over the next years, a place where we are going to be able to be super empowered to be able to look at problems and work on them and have solutions in our own hands, in the hands of individuals, in the hands of communities, which previously were the types of solutions that you had to be a very large government or a large company to be able to do. And so this is a world which I think we're, for good or for bad, these exponential technologies are around us. I think the bad side is when they surprise us, and the good side is when we're all aware of them and understand the capabilities that these technologies are giving, and then able to share from person to person, from industry to industry, moving between industry and universities, different age groups, everybody together coming up with new ideas about how to use these technologies, which people working by themselves might not come up with. But the good news is we don't have to work by ourselves on these. Thank you.